Hello, my name is Sam Feltham and welcome to Expert Interviews here on Smash the Flat. Now for you today we have a little bit of a different interview for you. It's not health and fitness per se, but it is sort of something to do with nutrition a little bit. And it's going to be on climate change and how cattle could actually be the solution to it. And amazingly, I've managed to get the director of a fantastic documentary back in 2010 called Carbon Nation, director, Professor Peter Byck. How's it going, Peter?
Sam, it's nice to be here. I'm actually here. I'm actually home, so it's nice to be here too.
Not in the woods. Just to get that straight, you're not in the woods or in the middle of a field.
I'm in a painting. I wish I was in London, actually. I love London.
Oh, fantastic. Super. So as I mentioned there, you directed this film called Carbon Nation with a great tagline, which was a climate change solution movie that doesn't even care if you believe in climate change or not, which is another great point, I think, about that movie and all of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today. From that, you actually made a couple of short films, Soil Carbon Cowboy, sorry. And kind of that name might confuse people, but when you see the film, it completely makes sense because it's all about sequestering CO2 into the soil, but the soil has to be managed properly. Now, kind of before we get into all of that, and just to mention to all the listeners out there that have read my book, Slimology, this is the guy that I mentioned in my book in chapter 4 about the fact that it is possible to have sustainable meat out there. So thank you so much for that, Peter. But before we get into all of that, how exactly did you get into this crazy world of sustainability and, cattle grazing and all that jazz?
Well, I saw An Inconvenient Truth at its world premiere in Sundance in '06, and something clicked inside of me. Literally, I was waking up at 4 in the morning, which was very unusual for the next few nights, and I decided that I should something was there, and it took about a year to develop a team, and that's when we started to make Carbon Nation. We wanted to make a film about solutions. And that tagline that you mentioned took us as long as it took us to make the movie. It took 3 years to make the movie. It took 3 years to come up with that tagline. I remember walking around with my friends all over the place. We got to have a good tagline, tossing all sorts of stuff up there. Because the film title, Carbon Nation, doesn't say solutions, but it's funny. And I put funny higher than anything else, because then it's, we're not taking ourselves too seriously. We could probably get to more people. And so we knew we needed a tagline, and it was really about folks like my Uncle Phil, my buddy Turney, who just don't think climate change is happening, yet they like all the other stuff I'm talking about. And so if we just get away from that one thing, just get, a couple inches above that debate, which is a very well-played debate. We're all in that debate because it was well-played. Then we can get to solutions. And so in Carbon Nation, we get to this point in the film where we realize even if we went to renewable energy and energy efficiency and all these things right now, we still have too much CO2 up in the atmosphere. And so how do you deal with that? How do you draw down more than you put up? And it was in the land use research that we started seeing that it was possible to start bringing some of it down. And that's what we got in Carbon Nation when we were, and then I spent 3 years on the road promoting that film and started thinking about what is it that I want to talk about. And the real thing I wanted to talk about after that was the soil, was this thing that could start sucking down more carbon. And then you find out that something like a third or a tenth or a fifth, depending on who you're talking to, of the carbon that's in the atmosphere right now came from the soil. So it's not just fossil fuel emissions, it's actually soil emissions. Carbon, soils are made of carbon, soil, organic matter. And when you have that soil healthy, you've got like 3, 5, 7% carbonaceous material in there. And now we've got soils that are like 1 and 2% full of carbon in all its forms, which means that the carbon went someplace and it went into water and it went into the air. And so then I started really focusing on the folks who were doing the grazing. this what we're calling adaptive multi-paddock grazing. Some folks can call it holistic management. They share things, and there's also some differences. And to see how the way these ranchers are grazing, these farmers are grazing their cattle, moving them around in small paddocks as if they were a herd, being hunted by wolves. And so they hit an area really, really heavy, boom, 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 with their manure and their hooves, and then they're pushed off artificially now, and go to the next place, and then that last place gets to rest. And last summer, within a 1-week period, about a year ago right now, I filmed in northwest Kansas that was experiencing serious water shortages just naturally, and they'd just been in a big drought. And then I went to Cornwall and Devon.
Oh, wow.
And so in Cornwall and Devon, they had too much water. And in northwest Kansas, they didn't have enough water. But the solution to both problems was how they were grazing their animals. It was the same solution because it was about healthy soil. And once you have healthy soil, it moves water out when there's too much of it. It holds water when there's not enough of it. It soaks in all the water from the rain when you get what you get. So it's really me thinking about solutions to climate change and going down that whole road, coming back, looking at the cows. It's actually soil. And we know so little about soil. I've got soil scientists that tell me we know more about Martian soil than we do about Earth soil. We know 1% of the microbes that are in the soil, right? And right to the health piece, to what you work so hard on, the soil's full of microbes. Our gut is full of microbes. How are those two systems talking? And then you add the gut microbes of the animal, of the cow or the steer.
Yeah.
How are all three of these guts talking to each other? What microbes are the same in all of them? How do you see when you're healthy or unhealthy? And what are we doing? And so these are all the things that are sort of just bubbling right now. It'll eventually be a full-length film, and it's just all sort of flying around.
Amazing. So is that going to be in Carbonation 2.0 or?
Well, Carbonation 2.0, just our internal stuff, is really a bunch of short films right now. Soil Carbon Cowboys being one of them. Soil Carbon Curious being one of them. And but eventually there will be a sequel, whether we call it Carbonation or not. I think Soil Carbon Cowboys is working pretty well, so I think we'll stick with that title. People seem to like it, and it's evocative.
Absolutely, it's certainly kind of like takes you back. Okay, what's that? Soil Carbon Cowboys. What's that about? And I mean the film. It's 12 minutes long for those that want to see it. It's available on YouTube with Spanish subtitles, I believe.
If you want it.
Yeah, or on your Vimeo channel, which is I think it's just vimeo.com/Peter Byck.
Yeah, but if you just look up Soil Carbon Cowboys, you'll get both films will be like right in your search. Easy to find.
Yeah, absolutely perfect. And kind of during that film, it is about these farmers and cattle grazers that were having problems with their farms.
Yeah.
And then was that a case of you turning up and kind of presenting a solution, or did they kind of find it on their own? Or
no, let's make this really, 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 really clear. I'm learning from them.
Brilliant.
They're the pioneers. They're the scientists in the field. They're the heroes. They're the ones putting their lives on the line to experiment and work out. I'm just showing up and filming, and now I am playing a part in this whole game, but that's because of what they've done. There's nothing without these ranchers and farmers who have worked so hard for decades on these techniques that are now starting to really kick in. So you've got Neil Dennis up in Saskatchewan, and he was just going out of business. I mean, his family had been working that land for 100 years, and he was just going out of business. The machinery was too expensive. The inputs, chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, everything was too expensive. And once he took all that away and started doing things the way he did learn with holistic management, where he started seeing a difference. He tried to prove it wrong, like he says in the film. He thought it was bull X, and he just did it because his wife made him. And then when he started seeing the difference, he started taking notes, and he's now at the front of what I see when I go onto these ranches and farms. He's packing them in tighter, moving them more often, and his land is more robust. So he's jumped all the way in. He's seeing what he's doing. He's building soil like this in a decade. You know, that's not supposed to happen, right? It's not supposed to happen. It's supposed to take 1,000 years to build an inch of topsoil.
Wow.
And he's building this much in a decade. He can show you where he put hay down 7, 8 years ago, and you see the layer when they dig in the hole, and then it comes back up. You know, he's building it, building it, building it. And so, and this is counterintuitive to a lot of scientists, a lot of smart scientists. And so we have found a bunch of scientists who are very interested in what Neil and the other folks in the film and other folks around are doing. You know, bug specialists and soil specialists and animal health specialists and water specialists and forage production, plants and wildlife and biodiversity. So we've put together this team of scientists to really understand what is happening on these ranches, compare them to the conventional ranches across the fence or down the road or across the county. And that's this big science project that I am playing a part in. I am helping to organize with these scientists and trying to find the funding and working along those paths. And one of my closest partners on this whole project is a guy named Russ Conser. And he came to this whole thing because he wasn't in good health. And he did the research and he realized that grass-finished beef was healthy food. And that conventionally grazed cattle with all the corn and the antibiotics and those things isn't healthy.
No.
And so from him, he came in through that door. And then we've got all sorts of people coming in through their own particular channel. And it's all very much a lot of moving parts right now. A lot of moving parts. How are we going to figure this out? How are we going to do the science that communicates to the skeptics and the folks who think that grazing cattle is not a solution for anything? Or my vegan friends, you know, I tell them you need healthy soil. You need healthy soil. And to my research, which is limited, and I'm not an agriculturalist, the fastest way to get that soil healthy seems to be including animals, livestock in your process.
Yeah.
It's a natural engine. It's a natural technology. And it was evolved over hundreds of thousands of years on the Great Plains. And then you just go back and you say, where were the biggest, deepest, healthiest soils produced on the planet? And a lot of people would say the Great Plains of the US. 100 million bison running around, farting methane, burping methane, yet there wasn't a real big methane problem, right? Right. And so what's that about? So we want to find out what that's about. There's these things that some of the microbes we know about are called methanotrophs, right? I saved you on that one.
Yeah, thanks, man. We were having problems pronouncing that before, but thanks, Pete. Appreciate that, man.
So with these methanotrophs, they eat methane. Do they eat as much methane as the animals emit? What's the net gain and loss? What about the nitrous oxide coming off these ranches? What about the carbon dioxide coming out of these systems besides going into these systems, you know? And so is it a net sink? Are these systems really sucking down more carbon dioxide than they're emitting? Those are all the questions that we want to answer. It's looking pretty amazing. We have early data that makes us think that, yes, it is a carbon sink. But how much? Where is it different? What are the similarities? All these things we want to find out.
And does it vary in terms of how deep the topsoil is and what type of growth is on top of that topsoil as well, perhaps? Like kind of all these variables, and it sounds like it's really kind of early days. But the thing is that this kind of cyclical grazing is something that we have done in the past, but we kind of fell out of tune of it, didn't we?
Yeah, I was just reading this book called Dirt by David Montgomery. I highly recommend it. And he was talking about in the 1850s, 1860s in England, they were doing great work with rotating the animals and rotating crops and animals and crops. And then someone decided they wanted to put up a bunch of fences. And they stopped the movement of all the herds across society and put them, it like changed the whole cycle, but it was really working. But the idea of, have we done this before? Is this new? Is this old? You know, some parts of it, as Alan Williams said in my interview, is like, it's so old, it's new, you know? But there are new things here. The way that Neil Dennis is pushing it, the way he's managing by 2 hours at a time sometimes, and that stuff is new. the idea that animals and soil and forage all work well together is not new. Not new at all.
Mm-hmm.
But how we're moving them, and then working on the type of breed. There's a different type of cattle for grass finishing than there is for corn finishing and grain finishing. And obviously our system here in the States is based on corn finishing.
Yeah.
It wasn't 50 years ago. Corn became much more, they were growing a lot more corn, subsidized. We have a lot of policy that pushes corn into the system. And then folks started really liking the way corn tastes in the cattle, but it's not as healthy for the cow, and it's not as healthy for the human being who eats the cow. And so if you come at this from health, then you have to look at what the animal's eating, and that forage is critical, obviously critical.
Absolutely. And something that I'd be interested in is to see if that forage actually gives them a better omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, which I'm sure it pretty much does, because of lamb. New Zealand lamb, for instance, it's purely, bred on grass, has kind of the best omega-3, omega-6 out of kind of any red meat. So
right. So that's other stuff we want to test, but you're hearing that for sure. Mm-hmm. You're hearing that the profile is much better on grass finished. I think it's the amount and it's the ratio. Yeah. And you want to get the 3s up, but the 6s I don't think you want to get them away completely, do you?
No. Like the ideal balance is 1-to-1. If you can kind of get it in a 1-to-1 ratio, then you're good as gold. Within your body as well. Right.
And so listen to that. So the ideal balance with omega-3s and omega-6s is 1-to-1. When you're in the soil, the balance between bacteria and the fungal community is really important. And what's that balance? I was going to say 1-to-1 is really good for glands, but I might be wrong about that. And again, that's why I'm on a team with a bunch of scientists, so I can ask them that. Brilliant.
And obviously open-minded to kind of looking at new, different ways of doing things. Because as we say, we are in the early days of this. Yeah. In terms of like the actual kind of proper, robust data and science methodology. But for all the folks out there that have kind of never heard of any of this stuff before, what's kind of the conventional wisdom of kind of regular cattle grazing, and how do you improve topsoil and things like that?
I've met a lot of ranchers who are conventional ranchers, and they care about their land. So it's not like conventional ranchers or grazers are not thinking about their land and not caring about their land. It's just
like sports people. They want results, right?
They want results, and sometimes it seems like conventional grazing, from what I've learned, is large paddocks. So let's say you've got a 5,000-acre ranch. You might break it down into 500-acre paddocks, move them around 6 times in the year or something like that. And that is rotational grazing, but as one of our scientists will say, that's rotationally overgrazing. So what happens is when the animals get a lot of land without a lot of pressure from their neighbor, they just eat what they want, which means they overeat that. And then the thing they don't want, the weeds, just start growing up. The weeds they don't want to eat. There's definitely what we call weeds that are very nutritious, and they do eat them. So that's a bit of a misnomer. So you get this imbalance almost immediately out in the fields, that then you can add chemicals and you could do a lot of other stuff to try to balance out. And it's just sort of chasing something. Whereas with the way that the adaptive multi-paddock grazers are working, is they're packing their animals in so they don't have much of a choice of what they eat. So they eat a sort of a level thing, and they don't overgraze. They don't eat too far down. They eat, when an animal eats just what it wants, it stops like about here. Let me see. Yeah, it stops about 6, 7, 8 inches itself naturally, but it'll keep eating if that's all there is to eat, right? And so if you get those animals to eat the plant to there and then move them off, the plant's been sort of, that eating to there actually stokes it. It's like stoking the fire. And that's when it starts really sucking down a lot of CO2 and starts sending it into the microbiome in the soil. And that seems to be the engine that's producing more forage on less land. And so, a lot of people talk about cattle production as, it takes so much land. But if you can increase your productivity on each acre, then you're using less land for the same amount of food. So we're actually hearing people that are feeding a lot more people on a lot less land because their soil's healthy. The water system is working. The water cycle is working. The carbon cycle is working. The nitrogen cycle is working. All these things that are essential, you know, and what are those cycles in us, you know, to your work? What are those cycles that we need? And can this system help us feed ourselves? You know, what are we feeding? Are we feeding the biome in our gut? Are we feeding, you know, because what is it? We're like 98% not human, the DNA in our body.
No, 90%. Yeah, 90% my gut microbiome.
Yeah. So who are we feeding, right? And so if we know more about the soil and know more about the microbiomes, I think it's just going to help. It's probably going to confuse a lot too, but
yeah, it's going to take some time to kind of work out all the creases, basically. But kind of the push is there, and kind of by the sounds of things, you got some really kind of good early data that kind of, you know, proves that this system is kind of the way to go forward in terms of, you know, the welfare of the animals, the nutrition of the animals themselves for us, kind of their impact on our health, but then also the environment as well. And before we kind of came on the air, you were talking about a project that you're doing, a brochure that a booklet, sorry, that you're finalizing, and you're trying to, I believe, is it get 1 million tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere? Yeah.
Well, our working assumption with this project, it's called million tons, and wow. It's metric tons. We've been having that debate inside our team.
Oh, as well.
I was just like, oh, another word. And then if you spell tons, like, you know, over here we spell it T-O-N-S, and over in your world it's T-O-N-N-E-S, and it's like, that's more text, and, you know, just that kind of stuff. But the idea is that we want to do a pilot project to show the sequestration of 1 million tons of CO2 every year for 3 years. And we feel that there's already a number of ranchers who are doing it anyway. Mm-hmm. They're already drawing it down, so let's measure it, right? Let's prove it. So let's prove it's coming down on their ranches. Let's go across the fence to their neighbors who are doing conventional grazing, and let's see what's happening over there. And if there's a distinct difference just across a fence line, you know, same amount of rain, all that, same soil type, same slope, you know, all those things, same amount of cattle, just in different ways of maneuvering it. Those are all really hard things to find naturally in the real world. So you have to get a lot of ranches, and you have to do a lot of systems. So it's very expensive to do all these things. And so we want to find out about the carbon. We want to find out about the water. We want to find out about the nitrous oxide. We want to find out about the methane. We want to see what's happening below the ground in the soil. We want to see how much forage is being produced. How much more forage is being produced on one system versus another system? How much bare ground do you have? Because when you have bare ground, you don't have plants. And when you don't have plants, you don't have photosynthesis. And when you don't have photosynthesis, you don't have carbon going into the ground and amongst all the other stuff. And so we want to measure all these things as we're finding out if 1 million tons can go down, as we work on how do you work out a soil carbon market. Soil carbon is not traded in any carbon market yet. It's just getting there. I mean, there's a couple of volunteer deals that have happened. So we have to educate the policymakers, because they're making policy based on the science. Current science is saying this can't happen. You can't do it. So you got to do the science. And so there's a lot of moving parts to this project, but you know, we want to reach out to ranchers and farmers and show them these films and say, hey, have you thought about these methods? Yes, it's a gamble. So let us help you. And because we're seeing ranchers who are making more money, working less, with healthier land. And so we're not trying to tell you to do something. We're not trying to get a government mandate. Forget that. You know, people don't like to be told what to do, right? But if you can give them incentives, I don't like to be told what to do. If you can give them incentives, give people incentives and help, and let them find it. So, you know, those are all the pieces of the puzzle that we're working on right now.
Fantastic. And it really does sound like it's kind of like a triple win. in that, the farmers are making more money, the cows are having better lives, and then the meat that they create is helping us. And I suppose it's even a quadruple one. If it's drawing down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, then it's kind of it's a done deal, because essentially carbon dioxide is plant food, right? And kind of them drawing more down is going to help growth. Is that right?
Yeah, and Judith Schwartz has a book. I believe the title is How the Cows Will Save the Planet. I might have a word or two wrong in there. She has this great phrasing. It's like, we don't have a carbon problem, we just have a placement problem. It's just, we got carbon in the atmosphere. Well, we need it in the soil. So let's match that. And it looks like cows are an excellent tool to do that, right? And then when you're talking about the win-win-win, you've got, if enough ranchers get together within a watershed, a whole watershed, then you can really improve the water holding capacity for an entire area. And then we're talking about water for cities being purified and held, and because of what the agricultural system outside the city is doing. So there's a really huge potential win. And wow. It's not like there will never be flooding and there will never be drought. Obviously there's both. Those are natural systems forever. But healthy soils help mitigate the effects of drought and of flood. They're spongy. They hold on to water. So in a drought, they're releasing water where other people across the fence aren't. I've seen fence lines where people had healthy soil on one side, not healthy soil on the other, and the crops are just totally different growing during limited rain. And in flooding, it soaks it up. So you don't get that crazy flooding problem. And that again is stuff that's been happening in Cornwall and Devon that I was filming. The flooding was the big issue, and the erosion of the soil into the rivers that then go down and clog up the ports. Those are big, expensive issues. Showing waste. How do you prevent the waste? Well, you don't want the soil to be washing off where you need it and then going into the water system, polluting it where you don't need it, and then clogging up a port. It's all these systems, all these whole systems. So what we're trying to do is design a science project that looks at the whole system. So there's going to be more wins than three. It's not just win-win-win. People, planet, profit. It's definitely those three. But the planet piece has a heck of a lot of pieces to it.
Yeah. Very much so. That's incredible. And so potentially, how long, because at the moment, for those that don't know, we're at approximately 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide within the atmosphere. Used to be 350, roughly in the 50s, I think it was, which is kind of the upper limit.
It was 350 in the 90s.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So it's kind of skyrocketed quite a lot there. And 350 is kind of like the top bit that we that's where we want to be.
It's certainly it's a working theory that Jim Hansen has come up with, and I've certainly bought into it. We used that number in our film Carbonation as like, let's not go past that, right? Which we already are.
Yeah.
280 was the norm for about since the last ice age until the Industrial Revolution. It was 280 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. Now we're at 400. We just sort of scooted over 400, or right around there.
Yeah.
So that's the warming trend, right? And that's just going up. We're just going to keep using more energy, more fossil fuel energy, emitting more carbon. So how do you draw it down, right? So if it's the soils and if it's grazing, here's just back of the envelope kind of big picture, crazy wow kind of thoughts.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, where you were going. So we have 3.5 billion hectares of grazing land, pasture land on Earth, right? We've got 1.5 billion of farmland. Those are the rough numbers. And I think it's about 4 billion of forest, 5 billion of forest, a lot of forest. Of course, what we do to forests puts CO2 in the atmosphere or brings it down too. Of that 3.5 billion hectares of grazing land, if we could raise the carbon levels in that soil by 1% across that whole system, which is huge, but if we could, that would be just about equal to the amount of carbon that we're putting up in the atmosphere that's not being absorbed by other parts of the system, the plants or the oceans. The stuff that's staying in the atmosphere is about, just rough numbers, is about 4 gigatons, billion tons of CO2 every year. And if we could raise 1 percentage point on the 3.5 billion hectares, that's 3.5 gigatons. That's about what it would be. And so let's say we're not going to be able to affect all that land, right? And then let's say some of that other land is actually going to be poorly treated and it's going to be emitting carbon. But if we can get other land to 2-3% change, 4-5% change, then we're really cooking. And the one paper that we have that did testing in North Texas, the adaptive multi-paddock rancher got 3% increase every year for the 10-year study. So he got 3%. We want 1 for the whole world. We're not going to get the whole world. Some of the whole world's going to get worse. Some's going to get better. But we're seeing early positioning of how to do it. And we've got a massive industry. The cattle industry the beef producing industry is huge. How do you change an entire industry to doing something differently? It's a massive problem. But if we can show that ranchers are going to have healthier land, more money in the bank, producing healthier food, isn't that a nice aim? Isn't that a nice goal? Right? It's worth trying. It's worth fighting for. And so that's what we're doing. And we know we need science to back it up. So these are the ideas, and we know we need data, real scientific data to back it up. To see, not even to back it up, to see if it's really happening.
And I mean, that's incredible that it's gone up 3%. So potentially of that 3.5 billion hectares, you know, you could take 1 billion hectares of that. And, you know, if you raise that by 3%, then kind of, you know, you're well on your way to almost getting that 4 billion gigatons down, which is, that's incredible. But I mean, it's going to be a long slog to get there, right? But I mean, if kind of, you know, this is the way to go in terms of it, and, you know, farmers are going to be earning more money. And in the film as well, one of the farmers is saying that, you know, he's spending more time at home as well. It's less farming that he has to do because he just kind of leaves it.
Imagine if you've got that 5,000 acre farm or ranch, you've broken it up into 5 paddocks. I think my math was wrong. I think I said 5 paddocks would have been 6. It's really 10 paddocks. You let animals out in 500 acres, it's going to take you a while. You're going to spend time bringing them back in. I was at a ranch in New Mexico. They had 20,000 acres, and it would take them months to bring the animals back in. And so when you're doing these smaller paddocks, your animals are right there. That part of your job is done. So that's a time saver. The issue of haying and, you know, growing a whole lot of grass and then haying it. So you got to plant the field, fertilize the field, you know, harvest the field, and all that work. The folks we're talking to aren't doing any of that anymore because they're out with their animals looking at their own forage, and that's what's feeding the animal most of the year. And, you know, folks will bring in hay for the winter time, but even then, you know, it's a question of where you're getting that hay and where's the land. You know, are you taking nutrients off someone else's land and bringing it onto yours? You know, because hay is really, it's a way to move nutrients off of that piece of land and over here. So that's a whole issue right there. But so if you just spend more time with your animals looking at your forage and your cocktail mix of forage, it seems to be that these guys that we're filming and gals are learning a lot more, able to stop animals from getting sick sooner, a lot sooner. The animals themselves are getting a lot less sick in doing it this way. You know, I haven't seen a downside yet other than how fast can we scale it, right?
Yeah.
Can we scale it fast enough? Do enough people want grass-finished beef? People who eat beef, do enough people want grass-finished beef? And is that grass-finished beef being produced to the standards where they could get the most out of their land with the systems that we're talking about? That's the lever. And then on the policy side, having policymakers accept this type of soil storage, soil carbon storage, this type of carbon storage as a way to be part of the mix of carbon mitigation. Those are the big things, those big levers.
Absolutely. And obviously for the farmer, that would be another source of income for them, being able to sell carbon credits, essentially.
Exactly. Carbon credits, water credits, ecosystem credits. We see all these as potential revenue streams for the landowner, because the landowner is either going to be making systems worse downstream or better downstream. And if it's better, we pay folks to not grow anything on land that we want to take out of production because of erosion. Well, if they're treating their land so much better that erosion's a not issue, and they're producing, and they're sending clean water downstream, you know, that's a policy issue. Could we shift those funds to a positive rather than a neutral? And so you get all those things, right? All those pieces. Who loses? Who wins? Who loses fights? Who wins once? You know, it's
amazing, man.
It's not just a switch, that's for sure.
No, certainly not. It's going to be a long haul, as we said, but yeah. It's exciting. It's kind of the main thing.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a good place for us to wrap things up, unfortunately, Peter.
That's good.
But thank you so much for your time today. It's been absolutely incredible, enlightening, and for all the folks out there. If you haven't seen Carbon Nation, make sure that you go to the website carbonnationmovie.com, and you can buy a DVD there, and also links to kind of Amazon Instant Video, I think it's on, maybe. And all that jazz. So yeah, you can go there, and also on the website, obviously, they've got a blog, which is where you can also watch Soil Carbon Cowboys, as well as Soil Carbon Curious, and all of the upcoming short films that you're doing at the moment, I suppose.
Yep. Yeah, we're just going to keep pumping them out. You got to start focusing on ranchers, sort of like one at a time, little 2 or 3 minute profiles, sort of a satellite films to Soil Carbon Cowboys.
That's so cool. And then obviously there as well, people can go through to all your social media on Twitter. I believe it's at CO2Nation, and on Facebook, it's Carbon Nation Film. I think it is on Facebook. Yes. Nice. That was just off the top of my head. There you go.
You know, I tell you, it's funny. I'm not very proficient or productive on social media electronically, but I was teaching a class yesterday, and I was talking about how I meet people and how this whole thing's building. I realized that I do put a lot of energy in social connection, but I'm more of a person as opposed to an electron on that front. So it's just funny.
It is, man. I mean, you know, that's the world. The way that the world actually works is that it's social connections. If you socialize through social media, if you meet people through social media, that's fine. But if you're kind of, just face-to-face connection, it's probably better, in fact.
Yeah. I think I prefer it, but I think I'm missing out on a big important piece too. I barely touch into social media, so
you'll get into it, man. Eventually, sort out your science first, focus on that, and then
I'm looking for someone to do it for me. How about that?
Okay, yeah. Maybe we can chat afterwards, Peter.
There we go.
Help you out with that for sure.
Nice.
Excellent.
Nice.
Cool. And that only leaves us with one thing to do. Something I didn't mention to you at the beginning is that on the count of 3, we have our interviewees shout "smash it out" to the camera. Okay. So the count of 3, shouting, smash it out as loud as you can. So, as loud as you can, Peter, if you can. So 1, 2, 3.
Smash it out!
Awesome. That was so good. Absolutely fantastic. Everybody go watch Carbon Nation Movie at carbonnationmovie.com, or follow them on social media. Make sure you check out all their short films. And again, thank you so much, Peter, for your time today.
Thank you, Sam.
Perfect. Speak to you soon, bud.
Hey, man, if we're going off, I want you to meet my wife, Krishna, before we...
Oh, yeah, for sure. You stay on the line, and then we'll chat afterwards. But for everybody else, see you later.